What if working with archetypes came with fine print that we've forgotten to read? Hello, my beautiful souls, and a huge warm welcome back. This week's show is with the wonderful Caitlín Matthews. Caitlín is a now many time past guest. In fact, we could perhaps even call her a regular, and she's certainly a listener favourite. Caitlín is an internationally renowned author and a teacher of shamanic training programs. In this conversation, Kathleen and I explore the very real but mostly forgotten small print of working with myth and archetypes. We touch on the older meaning of myth as something that never happened and yet is always happening. The danger of lifting archetypes out of their living stories and the cost when we claim what is not ours. We also look at what actually helps: context, reciprocity, and clear human boundaries. So listen if you've ever felt the call of a god or goddess and wondered how to answer it whilst keeping both your wonder and your wits. And before we jump into all of that good stuff, first, it's time for your weekly omen from the algorithmic oracles. Athena says subscribe, and each week clear bright wisdom flies straight into your feed like an owl at dusk. Best subscribe. And if you're struggling with the challenges of walking your soul path in this crazy modern world and would benefit from guidance, kinship, and support, come join Unio, the community for wild sovereign souls. Unio is a living home for the wild sovereign soul path, where together we reclaim our wildness, actualize our sovereignty, and awaken our souls. We meet twice each month in our community guidance circles, so Jonathan and I can meet you exactly where you are and with whatever challenges you're experiencing. And I really do mean whatever challenges you're experiencing. Sometimes that can be about business, sometimes it's relationships, sometimes it's your spiritual path. I mean, it really is everything. And we'll guide you to meet the material for liberation your soul is calling you to, so you may become truly free, living the life your heart longs for. You can discover more and walk with us by hopping on over to bemythical.com/unio or click the link in the description. And now back to this week's episode. Let's dive in. Hello, Kathleen. A huge warm welcome back.
Hi there, Leanne. It's great. It's like having a pen friend. I remember those days.
One of our clients has got an actual pen friend,
Yes.
and I find it such a lovely, like, nostalgic idea. So I'm very happy to be your pen
No, I think it's
pal.
lovely. But, because I remember in the old days, I had a pen friend and I think she was in Trieste in Italy. And I'd have to think, I'd sometimes just write to her and then something, oh God, I haven't written to her for a long time. And then I have to think up something to talk about. So I'd have to write like an essay on something. So this is much nicer than that.
Yes. Well, again, I am honoured to be be that to you. We have got, talking about kind of thinking of something to write about, we've got something really wonderful to talk about, which I was just saying to you, although we've done a cornucopia of episodes on the topic of myths and archetypes over the years on this show, I'm not sure we've ever focused directly on the, I guess, what you call the small print. When you buy a car and sign a contract, there's some small print that goes with it. Those pitfalls, shadows, things to be aware of. And so that's what we're going to focus on today, which I'm really looking forward to. But first, I think, in case someone hasn't caught all of those episodes about
Yes,
myths and
indeed.
archetypes, I'm
Just in
sure
case.
I'll make sure that I will kind of include some links
Yeah.
to those in the show notes. But let's start by defining what do we mean when we talk about this idea of working with myths and archetypes? What does that mean to you?
Okay, so first of all, I suppose we have to define myth itself, which is is a very difficult word in our language now because it's come to mean something that completely isn't real, or is a lie. I mean, in the the good old newspaper headline, um, the myth of blood testing or whatever, and of course, it means the reverse of that. It means the truest thing that ever was. or in the the definition of Celestius, who was a philosopher who was living in the 4th century. He was given a very specific job because Christianity had started to be introduced, and then the Emperor Julian came to be emperor, and he wanted to let's just go back to what we used to do, please. And Celestius' job was to explain the gods to people, which was just before they forgot what that was. And and he sort of said about myth, he said, myth is something that has never happened and is happening all the time, which I think is a great definition,
Mm,
because it does describe that whatever the story is, of divine happenings, of things that spirits did, or ancestors or whatever, um, that the memory of it is enshrined in the myth, and that is what people remember. But that myth is not just happening back in time or in some otherworldly place. It's actually a record of our interactions
mm,
with God, spirits, ancestors.
mm.
Um,
And the world around us, the living world
and the
around
whole
us.
world around us
Mm,
as it is, because of course the recurrence of myth is something we see all the time. I mean, we draw parallels between what's happening in the news right now and things that have happened in our history, but also
mm,
there's kind of a mythicness to them, and you can see people sort of stepping into older footprints in order to bring about similar things yet again. So
mm,
it's kind of, it's going to happen whatever we do or not. But the way we engaged with myth in times past and now, I think, is really very important. And I sort of looked at the ancients a little bit in order for today, because I think that they have some good things to say about that. So I'll sort of bring up a couple of things. Um, but I think that the way that people work with myth now is very different, um, because we now don't have a sense of the sacred in the same way. And so now
mm,
we just talk about archetypes, by which we usually mean psychological archetypes. Although, of course, something which is archetypal, the word arche tells us what it is. It's something from sacred zones. It's not everyday stuff.
mm,
Um, so, I mean, in this household, we deal a lot with the myth of Arthur, for example,
mhm,
because the Arthurian legends are very much part of our have been part of our study in this house. And yesterday my husband had to explain a whole bunch of them to people of very different sort of capabilities and understandings, to see what what that meant. And it's what people can remember is very interesting.
What
Yes,
stands out
on
to
that.
them? What
So it's like they
yeah.
were
Mm,
astounded at the range of the stories and myths, because
mm,
um but they knew a few of them. Yeah, so they
mm.
had a few kernels of the nuts, but they and a few shells as well. But in some areas, they're they didn't have the meat of the whole thing.
Mm,
So I suppose that that myth is something that has never happened and is always happening, is, I think, a good way of thinking about this. And so
mm.
if it's going to be happening again, we need to be very careful how we work with it. Yes, because
Yes.
it
Mhm.
won't just kind of come through like a movie that we watch. It will actually affect your life. A
Yes.
whole
My
bunch
goodness.
of them.
Yeah. Um, there's so much that I want to dive into what you've just said, and I'm recognizing, um, how can I put this? We could end up doing the whole show,
Yeah,
without even getting into the small print, because there's just so
we
much
could
here.
indeed.
So
Yes.
who
Yeah.
knows whether there will have to be 2 parts to this, let's see. But, I love everything you've said there, and, the quote you mentioned, I think, has been kind of reworked and repeated by figures more recently. Joseph Campbell said something very similar, something like, "A myth never happened and it's always happening."
He was
And
quoting Celestius.
Yes. I
Yeah.
don't know if he did he know he was when he was quoting him, or are
Well,
you
it's
sure?
very difficult with Joseph Campbell because, when he wrote, his great long myth series,
Mhm.
he had read up on all those myths, and then he went out into a more rural place and then wrote everything up. So he didn't recheck everything.
Mm.
And so one always has to be aware of that when reading Campbell, that it's what he could remember. It isn't necessarily an exact quote sometimes, or an exact piece of mythology that we know that someone told the tale of.
Mm.
So I think what one must be careful. Always go back to source where you
Yes.
can,
Well,
always
as
do,
much as we
with
can,
Campbell.
because yeah,
Yes, as much
sometimes
as
the
you
source
can.
itself is a
But
retelling,
you can
but
also
yes. Mm.
triangulate. There are a lot of, for
Mm.
example, lots of classical writers who wrote about things, and they had different views of that. But that's a much more rounded view than just one person's telling. I mean,
Mm.
you know.
Yeah. Triangulate's a lovely way of saying
Yes, I
it.
think that's
Yeah.
so.
Um,
Don't just take wiki source as your full source. Yes.
yes. Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting, as you say, the way that our modern use of the word myth is
Mhm.
only using that first part of it. It's like a myth is something that never happened, and we
Mm,
stopped there,
yeah.
and we've lost the full meaning of it.
Mm,
Um, Touching more deeply on archetypes, because what I noticed has happened in our more modern, and I
mm,
think it's a wonderful thing the way we've kind of reclaimed this connection with the archetypes,
mm,
popularized probably mainly by Jung,
mm.
but f often, it's like we've kind of, like, pulled the archetypes out of myths and sort of
Yeah.
left the roots of the archetypes in the myths, but not realized we've
Mhm.
done it, and then just kinda, "Oh, that's fine. I've got the archetype now. I can kind
Mhm.
of
Mm.
work directly with the archetype without really understanding the soil that it came from." And so I'd
Indeed.
love to hear your sense of that, because that seems to me,
Yeah.
quite like a shadow in itself, actually, but a real modern phenomena where working, thinking we're working with the archetype, not recognizing we can't really,
I
because it
know.
belongs with its myth.
No, no, but I mean, I mean, if we take a different model, we can just say, um, people won't destroy the Amazon rainforest because there might be plants and trees that are really beneficial to your health, which is kind of a horrible view of, of things. But people use all plants that way.
Mm,
Yes, mostly.
yes.
They only want the benefit. They don't want to cultivate the plant or get to know it or hear what it might say to them.
Mm.
So I think that we're in a similar
Yes, with
situation here.
plants themselves,
Mm.
yes.
But
Mhm.
context is everything, isn't it? Absolutely everything. How can we understand things without context? And I'm remembering a Scottish song which is about whaling, and it's sort of "Oh, my lady, she wears the red rose. Does she think of the sailor and where he goes?" And it's like, because he's going out to hunt the sperm whale in order to bring back, the ingredient to make perfume. And it's like, no, we
Mm.
don't. We just think, oh, that perfume's fantastic. And I
Yes.
know we have similar problems
Mm.
with frankincense right now,
Mm.
because the frankincense tree can't give that much incense to us. So so yes, I think this is exactly the same. It's like, what is the context? What is the seed bed of the myth? What do you know of how people responded to that? How did they take that into them? How did it affect them? Because that tells us a lot more about how things were. Um,
Mm.
and if we go back to most myths are the founding story of a people and of their origin. And so, unless we understand them in that context and understand what the sacred relationship was with that, how can we work with it? I just don't
Mm.
understand that. Um, and it's something that we've lost as a result of the coming of Christianity, because we just everything became homogenized. So it was like
Mm.
all the temples shut, everybody stopped going to temples. It's like, what did they do at temples? Do we know what they did? Yes, yes, we do, to some extent, and how people were with things. But the ancient world was much more like Hinduism is today. That people who are Hindu can regard themselves as Hindu, whether they rest under a tree and that's the whole of their world for them, as a sadhu, or do they believe in the Trimurti and all the gods and goddesses and so on and so on? But they'll always have a favorite.
Mm.
Yeah. And so I think that was the same in the ancient world. And even people like sort of Plato, whom we think of as sort of just doing philosophy and talking a lot with other people, it's like, well, yes, but he also went to temples. Socrates went to temples, and he would often, be in a state of bliss because today was the day of Apollo or whatever, or that he wanted to honor the goddess by going down to the harbor. We read all these things in Plato. Um, and so, yeah, whatever people were doing, they were doing that too. They were going to temple, and
Mm.
they knew that they went to temple to be in a good relationship with the divinities that they did. And they would stop, and if they were in the countryside, stop and rest and honor the fauns of the place. So the beings that we can't see but that inhabit a sacred place. So whether it's a group of trees or a pool or a tree or whatever. So I think those are things that were part of ancient worship, and they're different from place to place, of course. Um, but they left us some very good records before everything went down. They did say some great things to us about those. I think the Plato says, over every herd of living creatures throughout all the tribes, there is set a heavenly daimon to be its shepherd. And by a daimon,
Mm.
they mean a spirit, a sacred spirit. So very often people did have a divine ancestor that they referred to, and that divine ancestor would have been under, under the aegis of a particular divinity. And we know this. I mean, it's a wonderful thing. This is from the Kore Kosmu text, which was a Hermetic text written in Egypt in the Hellenic period, and probably in Alexandria. And it's a conversation between Isis and Horus. And they're talking about, so how do people get souls? And, what happens? And Isis is explaining, that depending on what kind of what your diamond or your sort of ministering genii or angel or whatever is appointed to you, that if that's a warlike character, then it will be interested in war. If the guardian angels are of a gentle order, then the soul follows its way in peace. And if they're friends of judgment, then the soul will be good at judging. And if they're musicians,
Mm.
then the soul will sing. And if they love truth, they'll be a philosopher, and so on. And so it's like the soul is also in a state of immersion within that divinity, and so understands about it, which is a wonderful explanation, I think, for us, because, of course, everyone living has something that, as a child, really called out to them in a book. There
Mm.
was one divinity or one hero or heroine or whomever, and they just thought, wow, I have to read everything about this, in the same way that we kind of have a favorite color or kind of music or whatever. We want to follow that. We want to have it round us. And so I think this is a good way of beginning, because it's not so much that we seek out the divinity or the archetype. It's like they've already sought out us.
Oh, yes. Oh my gosh, I love that so much. It
So it's like,
um,
and you'll find other people like you who are in the same club.
yes, yes, of course. There's a couple of points I want to touch on from what you've just said. What you just said there, I think, is fabulous, and it brings to mind astrology, and whether or not
Mm.
one I guess, believes or follows astrology,
Mm.
really to some extent, that was the ancients' understanding of what you're saying here. Is
Yeah.
like those gods and goddesses of the
Mm.
celestial realm were
Mm.
already kind of choosing us and speaking to us before
Mm.
we came into this world and
Yeah.
started to kind of have our own ideas about it. And I think that's, and again, that relationship to, I'm trying to say this in a way that it's not like we all need to become, interested in astrology. I personally am very
Yeah.
interested in
Yeah.
astrology,
Yeah.
but I'm not saying that we need to. But there's something about recognizing that,
Mhm.
and that kind of, as you say, we're kind of like cooking in
Yeah.
the energy of those archetypal beings, for want of a better
Yes.
word, that I think astrology does kind of bring us back present to, that is
Yeah.
part of what we've lost connection with. The other thing that really stood out to me was what you were saying there about temples. And I had a experience over the summer where we went to Rhodes, the Greek
Yeah.
island, for a week. And as part of it, we went to a place called Lindos,
Mm.
and there's
Mm.
this kind of ancient hill that's quite a big hill, so it felt more like a
Mm.
mountain when we were climbing it.
Yeah.
And I didn't know much about it. And my husband had sort of planned that we were going to go there, and I hadn't really taken huge amounts of notice of what was actually at the top of this mountain. I had
Mhm.
some idea, and it wasn't until I got to the top I realized that there was other things, but there was also
Mm.
a an ancient temple of Athena.
Yes.
And I've never had this connection with Athena. I have other Greek goddesses that I've had more
Mm.
of a
Mhm.
connection to, and I haven't
Mm.
particularly had that with Athena until finding myself
Yeah.
spontaneously at her temple.
Yes.
And my goodness, like I don't really have words for how powerful that was. And I
Mm.
think again that context of being on top of this hill,
Yeah.
overlooking the sea,
Yeah.
the power of the place, the beauty of this
Mhm.
temple, and it gave me this taste of
Mm.
Athena that I have never had before.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, Athena is primarily in the Greek world. I mean, she's not just the supreme goddess of Athens, but she is the one who looks after cities, the civilizing arts and crafts, all of those things. But she can also be a goddess of war, which is quite
Mm,
interesting because Britain's the whole thing of Britannia goes right the way back to the tribe of the Brigantes. The whole sense of we understand that w- a lot of the places where Rome came, that the augurs were sent in first before the army, and they were sent in to say, "Hello, spirit of the land, whatever you're called. We, the Roman people, would like to do X, Y, and Z, and so on. And we, on our half, will be doing these things for you. Yes, and so
mm.
help us a lot here." And then they sent the troops. Yes, but they did recognise very many places in Britain as being like Minerva, who is, of course, the Roman
Mm,
Athena. Um, but even within Plato, he talks about Athena being one goddess that we know about, who has these civilizing craft and arts things and war. And then he talks about Egypt and says, and there's this other goddess who does precisely the same, and he sort of draws comparisons between them. So it's like the call sign's the same.
mm,
Yes, it's like the color red is the color red in every language. We call it differently, but we all recognize red.
mm,
Yes. But there are some colors that we don't recognize in certain languages and countries anciently, because
mm,
most people didn't have proper words that we would consider proper words for blue and green.
mm.
Sort of. They have sort of confusion words like we have in this country. Um, so I think there's sort of that understanding that when you're at a place, it just comes out of the ground at you. Yeah. So you
Yes.
know that
Mhm.
place belongs to that divinity. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yes, very much so. So before we go deeper into those
Mm.
shadows, pitfalls, small
Yeah.
print, I'd love to touch a little bit more on why might we want to
Mm.
reclaim that relationship to myth and archetype? Again, going back to that
Mm.
working with myth and archetype, we've talked a bit about kind of what they are.
Mm.
And certainly from my perspective, it has been some of the most deep, powerful, transformative, meaningful work of my life
Yeah.
to really feel them come alive in me. As
Mm.
you said earlier,
Mm.
these things aren't just what we watch in a film.
Yeah.
They change our lives. I'd
Absolutely.
love to hear your
Totally.
sense of
Yeah.
either personal examples or that
Yeah.
with
Indeed.
students. Yeah,
Yeah.
where you've seen these have these incredibly uh, powerful blessing actions upon us when we engage with them consciously.
Oh, totally. And I can give a very specific example. I mean, I've always been very keen on Rhiannon, and Epona, so the horse goddess, who is kind of really an Indo-European call sign because there's a lot of places that have this, and it's very recognizable. Um, and and that particular story, which of course comes in the stream of stories that we recognize are called the patient wife. So I mean, like Chaucer's. I'm going to forget the title of the thing, but the patient Griselda story is from the same zone. Um, and so that always meant a lot to me. And of course, part of that story um, is about she finally gives birth to a child, and the very same night that she gives birth to it, the child is taken from beside her by an unknown agency, and then all the midwives come into the room and think, "Oh my God, the baby's not here! We're going to get the chop." And so they go and kill a puppy, and they sprinkle its bones around her body, and you know smear her mouth with blood, and then of course she's eaten her own child. We couldn't stop her. Is the story they tell against her. Um, and then of course she's made to do her husband won't kill her, but he judges that she shall have to stand at the mounting block, which is where people come in to their dwelling place and dismount, and then she has to say, "Before you go in, I just have to tell you about myself and the story about myself." So she is forced to tell this completely untrue story, and then offer to bear people in to the rest of the building on her back. So that's the sort of the bit you need to know about this. But many years ago, when I was very ill, I mean, I was between the ages of 20 and 28, I was really seriously not well. And in order to earn a living, I went to the labor exchange, and they said, "Oh, yes, yes, you need to just um, go and work in the library." And I said, "Well, no, no, I'm trained for the theatre. I can't be doing that. Let me do a cleaning job." They said, "You're not well enough to do a cleaning job. You have to go and do." So I went there. I was also in a very unfortunate marriage, and of course my illness was really bad, and of course I needed a toilet a lot of times, so it was very often very late into work. Um, and again, I was always being dragged in, and sort of stories were told against me, which was, if you don't do X and Y, then we'll just have to sack you. And my husband was also very he was a drunkard, to make no sort of bones about it. And he was playing up and coming in and being, very annoying. And so I had that sort of, had that sort of terrible pressure of an illness
Mm.
and my workplace not supporting me. And they said, the next time he comes in, because I'd separated from him, um, we will just tell him where you live. So it was just appalling situation. And so one day I was in late, I was pulled into the office again, I was given a right old telling off. And I was so upset, I ran out and I sat on the back door of the library, which is where people came in. And of course, I sat there and I was weeping. And then all of these other late people started to come in. And I was suddenly, sort of everything kind of went like this. And it was like the two realities merged. And it was like
Mm.
suddenly the myth was there. It's like there I am sitting at the back door. And of course, people are sort of saying, are you all right? Wanting me to tell my story. And of course, I was crying too much. But of course, then I realized that, of course, they were coming in over my back. It's
Mm.
like, oh my God, it was kind of suddenly, it was like, this is where you don't take the archetype any further. Just like,
Yes.
yes, this is where you,
Mm.
but it was like suddenly, the knowledge of that myth and the closeness um, of the horse goddess to me was very, very finely tuned. So it was just that moment of complete fusion of my life and her life,
Yes.
which is not one that one wishes to completely endorse and go into. But of course, those are moments when you know that the connection is true. Yeah,
Mm.
it's the not taking it further
Yes.
that we have to be careful about, because um, there are things within our own character and personality, which of course will always predispose us to one or other of the archetypes. Um, but the living out of that archetype is not necessarily a good thing. When it comes to a spiritual vocation, that can sometimes be of a different order, because then people are seriously dedicated to
Mhm.
divinity that they've been chosen by. And yes, so things like the imitation of Christ is what is expected of people who go into monasteries, for example.
Mm.
But in everyday life, we need to be very clear about who is what, and that we don't get that sort of a psychological overlap with
Mm.
divinity. Yes.
Yes. I mean, it's, certainly brings to mind that classic Jung quote, "Until we make the unconscious conscious, it will become our lives, and we will call it fate."
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's a great example of that, isn't it? It was
Yeah.
your that the myth allowed you to make that conscious,
Yes.
and that allowed you, from what I understand of your story, to
Yeah.
choose differently,
Yeah.
to
Well, I
have
mean,
that
I
kind of
began to get better after that period, but it was a very embattled period when it was like, how can I ever go, how can anything ever be better? How can anything ever come right? And it took a few more years for that to happen, but it did. But it was the working through of that. But I've seen a lot of people go to that point and then be unable to go beyond it. It becomes the be
mm,
all and end all of their life, um, and that those complete identifications with archetypes are very murky
yes,
when people are
mhm,
living daily lives, because they also spill into other people's lives and into their children's lives and so on. So
mm,
I think looking at the small print on the what is it that connects us to a particular divinity or archetype, we really do need to understand that first, because the small print on the contract is not about it's not about anything other than what I will give and what you will give.
mm,
That's the whole part of any contract, is that I will do this. I undertake to pay you on time, for the car or whatever. And if I default, then X will happen and they will reclaim money some other way, and so on. They'll send the bailiffs round. So we need to understand all contracts, whether it's with our personal
mm,
spirits, whether it's with a divinity, or an ancestor. It's like we really need to understand what I do to keep this relationship healthy, and what you do.
yes.
But no
It's,
one asks. No one does
mm,
that. No one does that, and that's where the problems lie.
mm, it's, as we've as we've lost that connection
Mm.
with working consciously with myths and archetypes, we've misunderstood. Even though we're starting to reclaim that,
Yeah.
we don't understand culturally how potent they actually are.
No.
And so it's like we've lost the understanding of how to work with them, which we're starting to reclaim, but we're not really seeing
Yes.
the true power. It brings to mind, I think I mentioned when we spoke last, I'm currently training with a traditional Mongolian shaman.
Yes.
And there's so much in those teachings of that awareness of, what you're getting yourself into, those contracts of, as you
Exactly.
say, what you're going to give and take.
Mm.
And it's it wouldn't make sense at all, from what I understand, to a Mongolian shaman to just like enter into a relationship with a spirit blindly without
Yeah, no.
understanding who
No.
it is, what this is going to ask of me, what this is going to
Yeah.
cost me.
Yeah.
Um, and yet we are constantly making those choices
Mm.
innocently,
Yeah.
unconsciously, in the way that we engage with archetypes. And so one of the I think this may have actually been the reason we said that we'd have this conversation. We
Yes.
touched upon in our last conversation the ways that we can it's almost the flip side of the story that you just told, where we
Yes.
can be kind of like a bit like enamored with this, the glamour of a
Yeah.
particular archetype and proclaim I am the reincarnation of, I don't know, Mary Magdalene
Yes.
or something.
Whatever. Yes.
Yes, and I think any of us that have been in spiritual circles for any amount of time would have had
Mhm.
experiences of people saying things of that nature, believing
Absolutely.
things of that nature. So I'd love to hear your sense as to, um, I guess, what the what
Mm.
the potential cost is
Yeah.
of falling into that kind of fantasy, but also perhaps how we might recognize that in ourselves or in others that we are kind of in some sort of guidance capacity
Yes.
with, with their teacher or guide or
Yes.
whatever.
Indeed. But first of all, this applies to all relationships. I'll just say that the small print is not just in, divine
Mm.
and archetypal relationships, but in everyday relationships. And again, I used to be able to say things. Well, of course, we don't just jump into bed with X or Y, and of course, people do now. But usually, if you're going to have a lasting relationship with someone, then you do a few things together, you go to the cafe and have coffee with them, you go to the cinema, you go to an exhibition, whatever it is you do,
Mm.
you go to the sports match together. But then gradually, friendship begins, and friendship is, of course, the basis of everything because that's where trust enters in. Um, and so we do that with human beings. So how come we can't do it elsewhere? Um, so, how do we do that with divinities? We just have to be very careful because the archetype, the divinity is big. This is like really big. It's as different from the hums of poo as is grand opera. It's got big music. Oh, it's music that seizes you, you know,
Mm.
if I can sort of put it that way. So I sort of see things musically.
Oh, talk
Um,
about music. Before I forget, it was such a pleasure to hear you sing. And talk about small print. I think anytime you come back on the show, I think part of the small print with like you're always going to have to sing now
oh
at
yeah,
some
no, I can
point during
always
the
do that. That's
episode.
never a problem. I sing everywhere all the time, and no one's ever been able to stop me. So including my poor parents. Um, but but yes, but I think that the thing is that when the archetype is strong, as it is, that it can easily overcome you if you don't have your good human
Mm,
boundaries. So I know that I am a human being. I also, you know, know the horse goddess very well. Yes, and we have, I hope, a good relationship. And I also I know who she is, and I also she comes into me when I do shamanic work, which is fine, which is a co-consensual thing, yes? Um, but when that occasion is done, when that piece of healing is done, she leaves and I'm left behind, right? So
Mhm.
it's very clear. In the same way that I know what is my eye, I know what is a piece of grit, and I know the difference between something I'm seeing and something's come into my eye. So it's like we use our discrimination and clarity with this work, so that that I'm not then going to go off and swan around as the horse goddess in the full view of everyone. I'm not going to go to the supermarket and say, I demand this whole tranche of cheeses be delivered to my house, in a sort of goddessly way, which is like, no, I don't do that. Um, However, unfortunately, we all know people to whom that has happened, that they've got too close to the archetype without having the discrimination, without having the care and attention and respect which is really should be there, and they think they've become them, which is delusional.
Mhm.
But it's like if you open the door to something, in it will come. Did I tell the story of
Mm,
the goddess Ranga last time?
I don't think
No,
so.
okay. This was a client I had many years ago, and she was one of those kind of quite new agey people who kind of went, "Oh, flowers, how wonderful! Oh, birds, you sing so beautifully! Oh, Ranga, I love you!" And it's like, no, that was not a good thing to do, because the goddess Ranga is the goddess of plague, and she brings death, which is exactly what happened to one of this woman's children, which was, just
Oh my
appalling,
gosh.
an absolutely appalling thing to have happen. Um, so so we need to be careful. The ancient Greeks called this hubris, which means
Mm,
it means taking on the powers and challenging the gods and the spirits and the ancestors' power in such a way um, that you really put their noses out of joint. So,
Is that
um,
literally the original meaning of that word?
hubris is having so much belief in yourself, and that you think you are as God.
Mm,
Yeah. And of course, there are
mm,
lots and lots of stories about it.
yes.
And one of the chief ones is, of course, the story of Athena and Arachne, who gets turned into a spider because she boasts that her weaving is so much better than the goddess Athena, which is like, oh dear, that
Oh
was not a
god.
good thing to say. And so then they have a contest, and that's the
Mm,
result of it. So sort of being in a good relationship with the divinity also means having the humility of a human being. And if we
mm,
don't have that, then a whole bunch of stuff comes, and people can become totally delusional in their understanding of this, and take on the archetype, which is not the aim and duty of a human being.
mm,
And it ends with people doing terrible things, really terrible things, and hurting people that they love, and dismaying everyone around them. And usually that exercise takes them finally into a secure unit. Yeah,
mm,
because I noticed the great archetype is the men who think that they're Napoleon or Jesus or whatever, um, and there's one thing with mediating a divinity, which is like being the servant of a divinity, as a priest or priestess, or as an oracle or whatever,
mm.
but you don't live as the divinity. Yeah.
Yes, I think this is such an important conversation to have. And of course, the examples we've given, it could be that someone listening, like, well, I'm not going to believe I literally am
Mm.
whatever, say, for example, goddess it is.
Mhm.
But I think at a more subtle level,
Yeah.
I've certainly seen that happen a lot.
Yeah.
In circles that we've run before where we
Yeah.
are working with archetypes, I've had a number of times where women, again, very innocently, I don't say this in any
Yeah, yeah.
meaning to sort of judge or shame. This is kind of part of our
Yes.
kind of learning to work with these
Mm,
powers again. Um, but I've had women say, okay, yes, I'm going to sort of claim the archetype of goddess and I'm
mm,
going to work with that as
yeah.
my name. And and been quite upset with me, and I'm like, in
Mm-mm.
short, you work at that kind of like you believe
Yeah.
you are a goddess. It's not just
Mm,
kind of goddess level gifts, it's goddess level problems as well that
yes.
humans aren't equipped to deal with.
No.
And this is real stuff. I think we can
Yeah, no.
almost think, "Oh, no,
Yeah.
ultimately, it's just a psychological,
Yeah.
trick. It's just something to,
Yeah.
pretend we're working with." But no, there's real powers here,
Yeah.
and there are real pitfalls that can
Mm,
happen when we work with them in this way.
exactly. Exactly. And I think that the core problem here is that for many people it just remains a story or a psychological archetype, whereas actually the reality is they're real. And that's the I mean anything else is delusional, really. Um and and deeply disrespectful. I mean, um, I looked at a quotation from the 5th century Neoplatonist Synesius, who's a very interesting person because he was a pagan Neoplatonist who became a Christian and finally a bishop, believe it or not. But he was very interesting, and he had I just brought this bit out, and he said that the Boeotian legends, so this is part of Greece, tear to pieces those who intrude and spy upon the secret rites of Dionysus. Ignorance, in the case of initiations, is sanctity, and on this account the night is entrusted with the mysteries, and the caverns that may not be trodden are hollowed out for this reason. Moments and places are chosen that know how to conceal the inspired celebration of the mysteries. So he's talking here about the mystery religions into which people were initiated. So initiation into the mysteries of a divinity, enables you to be in a good way with them because you've got other people who are there too. And I suppose within our modern world, that sort of things like sort of candomblé and voodoo and so on, um, are good occasions where people are taken by divinities while they're celebrating or dancing. But there'll be someone there who recognizes who they're being, you know, um, seized upon by.
Yes.
And there'll be people to bring them down and look after them. But he also
Mm.
says, he said, beyond words of good augury or of good fortune, he says, and I'm speaking as one who cautiously employs sacred language, he says, um, as to those things which lie far away, meaning of the gods, it would be part of a foolhardy mind and tongue to reveal them, and let them be kept in so holy silence untouched by written words, lest anyone should cast an eye on anything not permitted. For he who reveals, as he who sees, such things incurs the wrath of the divine nature. So this is someone who's had experience of, the sacred world before Christianity, and who's still speaking from within Christianity, which is really interesting. So he's someone who has really experienced this himself, and he's saying, we don't talk about these things. And of course, things like the Eleusinian mysteries of Demeter and Persephone, they were never spoken of. No one ever spoke of them. No one. There are no records of anyone revealing what those mysteries actually were. We can infer them, but they're not bandied about. So there is a respect and a distance in the ancient world, which I think we find in places where these kinds of rites are still being done in different parts of the world, that people won't talk about. And if you go and speak to an elder of a particular indigenous tradition, they won't talk about things. In fact,
Mm.
our friend Alan Garner, who is out, the author, he went out to northern Australia and spoke to an Aboriginal elder there. And he talked to him over several days, but he was also witness of someone who'd come as a sort of anthropologist student, um, and who was also asking very similar questions. And Alan didn't say anything until after the person had gone away. And then he said to the elder, "You told me a very different thing from what you told that person you've just been speaking to." And the elder said, "Yes, we spoke to him like we were talking about the kids' version of this, whereas they'd been talking as people who were both initiates who knew." Yeah,
Yes.
so I
Mm.
think that there's a whole area around this that we no longer have, because it's all
Mm.
fair
Yes.
game, isn't it? And there
It really is.
are things now that, um but of course the mysteries are still the mysteries, and so, we still can't talk about them, um, in a sense, or indeed, as Robert Graves said, we could sit in a cafe and talk about them quite loudly, and no one would have the faintest clue what we were talking
Mm. Yeah.
about.
S Yeah, so true. It occurs to me that this is everything we've been speaking about here
Mm,
is such a nuanced, paradoxical, subtle realm in that we
mm.
are like humans for probably the whole of human history. We're going to be called to these powers.
Yeah.
And we're also going to find ourselves kind of in those areas where there is danger and there are
Mm,
places we're going to kind of get lost in the
yeah.
marshes.
Mm.
And that's the kind of the territory. It doesn't mean therefore we should stay away, but it also means that we need to tread with
Yeah,
caution.
yeah,
And I wonder what you feel in closing is an important message to give, or anything else that you feel would help people kind of
yeah,
navigate this
yeah.
terrain again, where we've lost so much that would help
Yes,
us navigate it.
yes. Well, as Celestia said, you know, myth is something that has never happened and is happening all the time. It's like, you know, when approaching divinities, you know, part of you will be like, "Is this true?" But actually, you know, if you behave as if it's true, that's pretty good.
Mm,
Yeah, it's not don't
yes.
don't swallow it hook, line, and sinker, but
Mm,
act as if this is the truest thing you ever did. Um, be respectful, um, be reciprocal. So if good things come to you as a result of working with an archetype or a divinity, well, at least thank them.
mm,
What are the rights by which you thank them? You know, what is pleasing to them? Yeah, those
mm.
are questions that we can always ask our spirits, you know, if we want to leave offerings for them. It's like, what is pleasing to you? In the same way that, you know you wouldn't buy your aunt a sort of, a great big case of really hard chocolates because she hasn't got the teeth for it, and she prefer to have some other sorts of things that melt in the mouth. But, so find out what is pleasing. Um and what is it that you're doing that's really annoying to divinities
Mm,
that you're working with? Because those are things that you can stop doing. It's pretty
yes.
simple.
Mm,
Um, but, don't behave as if you were the great god or goddess, whomever.
yeah.
I think that's it in a nutshell, really. Just putting it short.
Um,
You know, and be there with all your heart because, this is about love. And what
mm,
we love loves us. And,
yeah.
and we know that with, some divinities and spirits, that might be pretty rough love sometimes because they will often put us through experiences and show us things that we need to have undergone. Um, and that's also part of what we're fitted for as human beings, that we have
Mm,
certain capacities and gifts and so on. Um, and what's good for one person isn't necessarily good for another one. And so following the way someone else does something is not necessarily a good guide, but good manners are good manners. And I think good manners are are essential in all of life. So,
Mm,
be thankful, be gracious, be respectful. Those are really what it comes to, and be
yes.
inspired, which is which
Mm.
is what we always are, isn't it?
It is, and, that is really, again, I think such a human
Mm.
human, like, pull that we have, that
Yeah,
to what inspires us. My dog is breakdancing in the background. I
I
don't know
can
if it's
tell. I can see the
contributing.
shadow of it. Yes, it looks really exciting. Yeah,
It's like sort of like monster coming up from the deep.
yeah,
Um, but yes, that human, like, notice what you're being called
yeah.
to, notice what you're being inspired by. And I
Mm.
think, again, that's something that has called us back to myth and archetype.
Yes,
It's just so meant for us. And so
yeah,
if you're feeling that
yeah.
call, it's something to listen to, trust.
It really is,
Mm,
because if you don't actually believe that these archetypes or divinities are actually there and actually have powers, then of course, no, of course, you never give offerings to them because,
mm.
you
Why
know,
would you?
why would
Mm,
you? Because, they don't really exist. They're just figments of your imagination, which is awful, really awful. Um,
mm.
so, if you're doing sacred work, it does come with a terrain of, learn your craft, learn the context. And for goodness sake, if there's a particular myth or legend or something that's inspiring to you, go to the source. Get to the nearest that you can to the source of whatever's written down or of the places where these things happened, and know for yourself, because as you said in your visit to Rhodes, you couldn't have got that by reading a book or reading a story about Athena. You got it from being in the place. It swarmed out of the earth at you.
Yeah, it's,
Yeah. Mm.
nothing replaces that. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much. This has been, as ever, such a pleasure, in our continuing pen pal relationship. I've
Yes,
absolutely
indeed.
loved it.
Yes. Yeah, it's
Mm,
wonderful. I love it. And, I hope things go well for you, over
thank
the
you.
interval of our next, correspondence. And
Yes. Likewise. Oh, and before we close, where can listeners find out more about you and the wonderful work you do? Of course, the links will be on the show notes, but,
sure.
please do share that as well.
Okay, so I have a website which is HalloQuest, HALLOW, Quest, one word, .org.uk, and I also have a Substack where I write every week. And at the moment, half of my writings are completely free, and the other half are subscription only. And that is called, it's got my name, it's Caitlín Matthews, with the fada, HalloQuest Sanctuary. So if you put those two things in together, then it should bring it up for you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Until our next time.
Thank you.
Eh,
Great. See you then. Bye bye, everyone.
what a wonderful show, as ever. They always are with Kathleen. Here were the parts that really stood out to me. Sacred contracts, offerings, and good manners keep archetypal work grounded, sane, and mutually respectful. Context and lineage matter deeply. When we sever archetypes from their myth, as we so often do, very innocently in this modern culture, we lose their living power. The difference between identification and relationship is everything. When we remember right distance, the sacred can move through us without taking us over. If you'd like to hop on over to the show notes for the links, they're at bemythical.com/podcast/524. And as you heard me say earlier, if you're struggling with the challenges of walking your soul path in this crazy modern world and would benefit from guidance, kinship, and support, come join us at Unio, the community for wild sovereign souls. You can discover more and join us by hopping on over to bemythical.com/Unio. Let's walk the path home together. And if you don't want to miss out on next week's episode, head on over to your podcasting app or platform of choice, including YouTube, and hit that subscribe or follow button. That way you'll get each episode delivered straight to your device auto-magically as soon as it comes out. Thank you so much for listening. You've been wonderful. I'm sending you all my love. I'll catch you again next week. And until then, go be mythical.